Hello, and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Comics. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask. Hey.
How's it going, Taylor?
Oh, it's going well. It's been a while since we've done this, so it's kind of getting back in the groove a little bit.
I know what you mean. So tell any possible newbies the concept of the show in a nutshell.
Yeah, I like to think about this as like adult Reading Rainbow. You know, at the end of Reading Rainbow, where LeVar goes, you don't have to take my word for it, and then like 3 kids review books. We're those 3 kids, but there's 2 of us, and we review comics instead. So what we do, to better phrase that, what we do is we take comics and graphic novels that we love, and we go into this episode. Each episode, neither of us know what the other has picked, and we do a review. And I think every book we've chosen so far is a book we wholeheartedly like. We have yet to pick a book that I think either of us have yet to pick a book that's like, stay away from this book. I'm sure that's coming sooner or later. But yeah, for the most part, we do it that way. And we also pick books that are a little off the beaten path. We'll do popular stuff. We'll do DC Big 2 stuff, Marvel stuff. But a lot of our picks, as you'll find, are very indie a lot of the times. A lot of Image, a lot of Drawn and Quarterly, a lot of publishers you haven't even heard of. But basically, it's a way to give those kinds of books, a wider audience and a little bit more of a deeper dive.
So the other thing we do is that usually we record these on a Sunday morning when we're both drinking coffee. What are you drinking this morning?
Yeah, the very important coffee component of Coffee and Comics. I am drinking another AeroPress that I made about 30 minutes ago. I actually don't know what the beans are. I have sort of collected so many beans. I think it's Kaladi Brothers, which is a locally based, Denver-based, I was going to say distillery. That's not right at all. Roastery. I think it's Kaladi Brothers. I'm pretty sure it's Kaladi Brothers. So it's, just really good. I would say bright, earthy kind of flavor. AeroPress makes really good coffee no matter what you do. And I always do I actually do the sort of the hack on the AeroPress, which is to flip it upside down, put your grinds in that way, pour the water and mix it, let it sit for about a minute, and then flip it back over on your cup and press it out. That's the Tim Ferriss hacked way to do it. Normally people just have it over their cup, pour the water in. The problem with that is if you do it that way, you lose a lot of some of the first water in is the first water out, so you lose some of the flavor. It waters it down too much. If you flip it over, it evenly distributes the flavor, the heat, everything. It's more consistent. So yeah, how about you?
So this morning I got some beans from I got grounds of beans from Kicking Horse Coffee. I've got the Three Sisters roast. And as a coffee Philistine, I couldn't tell you what the hell it tastes like. I did. We chatted shortly before we started recording, and the few sips of it I had right then were it was like it says it's a medium roasty, but it felt pretty rich and dark to me. The label tells me that it is smooth, savory, and seductive. Of course, I naturally
do you feel seduced, Todd?
I disagree with that. It's like that one I had for weeks that was tropical fruit, and I was like, no, it's like chocolate. What's wrong with my palate? But it felt kind of dark to me, even though it was a medium. But then right before we started recording, I screwed it up. I put more milk in it and a little bit of vanilla syrup because I wanted to kind of cut that like way too darkness. And now it is like I went too far on the other way. But that's okay because once I sip it down a little bit, I'll put some more coffee in and I'll be okay.
I just want an episode of this where you just read off the descriptions of different bags because it's like there's always sort of a certain skepticism every time you say it.
I honestly, you should see me. Because a couple times I've bought these in my local Ralph's, which is like a Kroger's, but I'll go to the ground beans, and you should see me in that aisle where I'm overwhelmed with like different brands and I'm looking at them just like, this is bullshit. I'm like, there's no way that this one is, rich and fruity and this is sweet. And there was one that when I was looking at the Three Sisters the other day that described itself as both sweet and savory. Oh, wait, am I looking at that? No, this one was a savory one. But anyway, it was 2 conflicting, color designs, and I was, palettes, and I was like, that's not right.
You hear that, coffee companies? Todd doesn't believe your lies. Lies.
It always tastes like coffee.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've got in addition to our coffee picks, we have got two books today to talk about. Do you want me to go first? You want to go first? Which?
I don't care. I was.
Did I steal your thunder?
Yeah. I thought you were about to pitch it to me. I was just ready to read names off to you.
Well, let's start with you because mine's going to be kind of short and sweet. So I'm curious to see what you, if you're ready to go. You're reading this week.
I went into the bookshelf and pulled out an old book that I've had sitting there literally for years and haven't read, which is so stupid. But I don't know how it got overlooked. So anyway, I picked, and maybe you can Google this while I say it, but I picked a graphic novel called The New Teen Titans Games by Marv Wolfman and George Perez. So when I was, I'm hoping when you Google it, you will tell me what year it was published. But when I was getting into comics, when I was like 12 years old or whatever, I read a lot of teenage superhero books. That was just like Power Pack, Teen Titans, New Mutants. That was what I read. Mm-hmm. And so at that time, Marv Wolfman and George Perez were at the height of their New Teen Titans run, classic 80s franchise. Like I believe, I want to say they took it over in 80. They had a good long run on Teen Titans and New Teen Titans. I don't remember it exactly when it switched to the new, but at some point it did. And so they tell this cool story in this book where basically when the run wrapped up in 88, they had this idea for a graphic novel and started working on it. And so this was in 1988 and they got like 75 pages of art done, but they were waiting to do the dialogue and everything. They had the plot, but they're waiting to do the dialogue because they wanted all the art to be done. This Wolfman was the writer, Perez was the artist, and so Wolfman didn't want to write the dialogue until everything was plotted out because he wanted it to be as sharp as possible. This is his story in the beginning of this book, and then Perez didn't finish the art. They both got on other projects, started writing other stuff. Went through some writer's block, moved to different sides of the country. So they decided to get back together and do it. And this DC would not let Wolfman go ahead with another artist. Not that he wanted to do that, but it was sort of like, nope, it's the two of you or it's nothing. So this project sat around for like 25 years. So so do you have the year yet?
Yeah, well, it's
there's 2010.
There's conflicting information. So Wikia. The fandom powered by Wikia says 2011, but DCComics.com says 2013.
I want to say it's I think it's 2011 actually. Okay. And so I've probably had this book since then because I bought it soon after it came out and didn't read it for one of those dumb reasons. Like I was like, no, I'm going to go back and read some of those old Teen Titans comics. And recently in my recent, and it just sort of disappeared, just sort of sat on my shelf until I forgot about it. That is the terrible fate of TBR piles, Mm-hmm. And recently on trips to my comic shop, I've noticed that DC is republishing the entire run of Wolfman Perez Teen Titans in nice, they're soft cover, but in nice collected editions. It was also one of the first, it's got to be the first book I'm aware of that did great story arcs, so there was they were the ones who turned Robin into Nightwing. Mm. And I just remember this one issue where the cover of it is Robin's uniform on the ground and Kid Flash's uniform on the ground, and their backs are towards the viewer and they are walking away. And it was such a dramatic cover of this, of this series. You're like, whoa, mm-hmm. Robin and Kid Flash just quit. Yeah. But it turned out that they were sort of going through this identity crisis and they both, came back with, one comes back with I'm the Flash and Dick, of course, comes back as Nightwing. and there was the marriage of Donna Troy, who was Wonder Girl. And then there was this whole great series on this sort of villain, sort of spy, Tara. And I believe she was involved with Deathstroke somehow. It was crazy when I was a kid to be like, wow, these are like soap opera arcs, you know? So anyway, DC's republishing all that. And that was in the back of my mind. And when we started kicking up Coffee and Comics again and making it, you know, a real regular weekly thing, I found this, pulled it out of the shelf and went, okay, I'm definitely knocking this out. So
had you read it prior to that?
No, that's the whole thing. Like I bought it because when it came out and it was hardbound. And I think it was a thing where like I was super curious about it, but I knew I wasn't going to read it right away. Mm-hmm. But I bought it because one of them signed my copy. I can't remember which one. Oh, because the store just had signed copies there. Mm-hmm. And so they were like, oh, yeah, it's, you know, here's the one he signed and or one of the ones he signed. So I bought it, sort of added it to the collection just because of that. Mm. Gosh, how do I not even know? Yeah, it was Marv Wolfman. It was like a collector's piece and I just slept on it, which I'm sorry to say. Anyway, if you've Googled it, I'm sure you were looking at the art. It is perfect art of the time. And like it captures that 80s thing. And I'm not really sure in the story, that Wolfman tells at the beginning. I think I want to say that they went back and used the original 75 pages that they'd created in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Because, for example, and you watched the Teen Titans cartoon, I believe.
I watched the original one that was about 10 plus years old now. I haven't seen that new kind of more Powerpuff Girls looking one, which doesn't interest me.
Which is actually kind of funny. I've watched a few episodes of it with children. So, you know, they were very much into it. I wouldn't... I wouldn't. I don't know that there's a reason to watch it on your own. That's kind of weird. But anyway, you're probably familiar with a character I believe is called Beast Boy.
Oh yeah.
But in the 80s, I'm really really sure he was called Changeling. And they usually just called everybody by their first names. That was kind of the interesting deal with them. Mm-hmm. So he was like Garfield Logan. So anyway, I bring him up only in that the first whole 2/3 of the book, he has an extremely noticeable and uncomfortable mullet. And that's what makes me think that they went back and were like, yeah, we're going to use the original pages we drew in 88 when he was sort of maybe a senior in high school and he decided he needed a party in the back. Because it is super out of style.
Is it as jarring as Superman's mullet in various books over the years?
More jarring.
Okay.
Like Superman has that Roland Orzabal, Jerry Seinfeld kind of like neck hair.
Orzabal. Oh my God.
And Garfield in this has it's like a buzz cut on top and like
for those of you who aren't familiar, Roland Orzabal is the one half of Tears for Fears. So if you're sitting out there going, who the hell? Like
Jerry Seinfeld's hair twin.
Yeah, it's an impressive pull, but like if you want to brush up on your 80s knowledge, just throwing that out there too. How do they real quick, I'm looking at all the different art, and one of the things that jumps out at me too is Starfire looks a lot like how they would present Jean Grey or
I believe you mean Raven.
No. I'm talking about Starfire.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, at least in the pages I'm seeing here, she looks a lot like how they present Jean Grey or the hell is the X-Men with the white hair? Oh my God, Rogue. No, Rogue. Oh, Rogue. Okay. In the 90s X-Men cartoon, which felt very 80s, like the way they drew that cartoon felt very 80s, but it was a lot of like big poofy flowy hair, almost like Reba McEntire hair. For sure. It's got that. It's a very, if you're familiar with the Teen Titans via the original animated series, this definitely is a retro kind of look and feel. Just warning you all right now.
Well, it's it is the spitting image of what they drew in the 80s. Like that's the thing that's kind of weird about the changelings look, is that he didn't have that mullet. Maybe he did at the very end of the run and I just don't remember it, but that's not what he looked like in the comics I read. They've sort of like, that character design is different.
Yeah.
But Starfire with her super Reba McEntire, like feathered hair. I know exactly what you mean with the Rogue. Rogue had this great feathered hair. I was reading the X-Men, on that great, that was a good run.
Am I right too? Yeah. I'm looking at Nightwing. I'm assuming this is Nightwing. He's got like the very deep V-neck, like popped collar, like look.
Oh yeah, popped collar.
It's like that Nightwing costume. It's like the most kind of like, I don't even know how you describe it. It's the most theatrical, let's just say, Nightwing costume that I've ever seen. It's not the one you've seen for the. If you're like me and you know most of these characters through the DC animated series, this is not that. This is a different sort of look and feel.
He is vivacious.
It's
like a deep V-neck, like down to the navel kind of V-neck. Also, just in a great sort of cheesecake thing, there's a great sequence at the end where like Nightwing's in the hospital and then they and so he's shirtless while they're stitching him up, and suddenly they're called away like, oh no, we've got to get back to the tower or whatever. And he goes there shirtless. I was like, dude, you can't grab your shirt. What a weird thing to do, to be like,
just give him a t-shirt that says DC on it or something. Like, give him something.
Which is that, honestly, that's a great 80s thing that they included, because in today's sort of comics milieu, things are a lot more realistic about what kids are like and what's like social media is like and style is like, and that's exactly what they would have done. They would have grabbed some t-shirt and just thrown it on him that had some sort of ironic design or whatever. So that is very 80s to have this like cheesecake moment of like the the hunk bursting into the office shirtless. So anyway, what's really interesting is, and this may also be because it's from, because this story originated in the 80s, is there is nothing that is like it is a nostalgia trip to read it and look at the art and talk about these things like their hairstyles and their costumes, but it is not self-referential in that way. Like this is not a band reunion tour. It's not 25 years in the future talking about the good old days, or 30 years in the future at this point. It's very much like it's a standalone book. They talk about this in their introduction that they wanted to just sort of put the period at the end of the sentence. They'd both gone on to different series and they felt like, let's just do one big capper of Teen Titans stuff. And so it's very much like that. Like, it's a standalone book. You don't need to be aware of the various dramas that the characters went through in the 80s run that they did. You don't need to, you're going to pick up wherever it is. It's just like watching a movie of that era of Teen Titans. And because it's the original guys putting it together, it's perfectly captured in the period, like that's the whole thing about the costumes, is nothing's updated. Like, this is like 88 frozen in time in a story. So towards that story end, it involves a sort of, it starts with this guy that's a CBI agent. I can't remember what that is, Central Bureau of Intelligence or something. They create this new department that's like not the FBI and not the CIA, it's the CBI. So he is being, there's an attack. There's not, you don't see an attack. You just see some, what you assume are like military personnel discovering all these dead bodies at a certain location. And they're trying to rule out, is this a chemical attack or a nuclear attack or, terrorist attack? What's going on? But then they see in blood on the wall, your move, Faraday. And so it's calling out this one agent of the CBI, which shows that this was some personally motivated attack. And so this shadowy government council, they are literally depicted in shadow, just like when Sam Jackson as Nick Fury goes to his New World Order panel in Civil War, or not Civil War, in Winter Soldier. when he like appears before that like tribunal kind of thing, and it's just all these shadowy figures in the dark.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of them is like Powers Booth for some reason.
Yeah. And Nick Fury, we're supposed to believe Nick Fury didn't know he was working for this Hydra New World Order thing. Sure, Nick, you useful idiot. So Faraday goes before this, and they tell him they're going to suspend him. And right before he's suspended, he goes through his computer files again and gets all these files on the Teen Titans, shows up the Teen Titans and says, here's what's going on. And they don't know whether to trust him or not because he's kind of an asshole. But there is at the time I was reading it, I was it took me a minute to get into the rhythm of it, because it's very much like a movie where it opens with some action you don't understand. It doesn't really tie into the Titans and the main characters. Then it introduces this new character. I'm not sure if Faraday had been in other books before. He was new to me. And it's like all the pieces are being put in place, but it's possible as a viewer to go, God, where are they going with this? Mm-hmm. But I knew like, oh, this is the rhythm of a movie where all the sort of, inciting incidents are happening in this order, and then we're going to meet the heroes, and they're going to be confronted with all the sort of evidence of it. So he shows up at Titan's Tower and says, I need your help. Here's what's going on. We hired several years ago, the government started running these what they called blue sky scenarios, where they just asked all these, I guess, experts or I don't know if they're particularly games inventors, but people to come up with like crazy things they hadn't thought of that they might need to defend against. And this one who called himself the games master, Faraday thought was a little too serious about it, and he fired him. And now the games master was getting back at him by enacting one of these blue sky scenarios. And this blue sky scenario involves the Titans, and it's one of those, like you've seen in movie plots before, a sort of specialized way to take out each Titan and also hit them where it hurts. So it's like, I wouldn't just, I'm wrestling with the idea of like original, is that an original plot, or is it just a good plot for the Teen Titans? Because it didn't feel unoriginal to me, but so it also, but it also felt like I knew enough about where they were going that I was able to sort of skip over like a bunch of details. Keep in mind though,
like when this was first conceived, we didn't have the past 25 years of movies repeating some of those tropes again and again and again. So it probably at the time felt slightly more, if not even a lot more original. Than you wouldn't, maybe if this had come out, when it originally was kind of planned, you wouldn't feel as much that way. I don't know.
That's a really good point.
Coming between.
Yeah, I didn't feel like this is a trope that we've explored enough. I felt like they were using the trope in order to shortcut some of the storytelling, where a lot of the books you and I read as ongoing series, even when they're presented in arcs like that, for example, like Saga or Black Science or like even Chew, those creators have made this wholly unique universe. And there are so many clues and references and, things like that if you pick up, trade paperback number 5 of Chew, you might really enjoy it because that's the start of a new arc, but there's going to be all these references back to, this felt like I don't need to nitpick all the details of Faraday because I already understand the sort of, again, I hate to call it a trope, but the sort of trope of like, yeah, this one evil dude has figured out how to hit each individual Titan where it hurts and to separate them all. And that is where, that's where we're going. So they got to figure it out. Because of that, and they don't do it as a reunion tour, because it's like a very much we're picking up where we left off, but it's 25 years later in actuality. This plot allows them to separate, to tell short character stories about each of them because of the way they've been separated and picked out. So because they realize, well, there's this possible menace coming to each of you and your families, they have to go, various members like go and tell, their loved ones like, hey, we've got to put you in a safe house. We've got to, like, Raven goes and spends time with her mother.
Oh, okay.
So she does things like she leaves her communicator behind and goes and rides horses with her mom. And that also means that she doesn't receive a communication when in Vic's story, Cyborg, oh crap, I forgot her name. The woman who helped him with rehabilitation that he's like very, very close to is taking all these kids out. They're all on a school bus. So it's all these kids with like cybernetic and prosthetic limbs. And they find out there's a bomb on the bus. So they have to get all the kids off, but the kids don't walk that well. And so they can't get far enough away from the bus. So Vic's friend jumps back into the bus and just starts driving it to get the bus as far away from the kids, So the Titans realize what's going on, and they try to get in touch with Raven because they know Raven can teleport to the bus and just pull her out. But Raven's communicator is, left behind because she's out riding horses with her mom. And so there's like these cool little character things where if you know the characters, you're getting to sort of spend time with each of them alone, even though it's kind of terrible time in, ways like that, like Vic's experiencing a tragedy. But, and Vic, of course, can't make it there because his grandparents are on a yacht, like on a cruise, and he has flown the Titan's jet to meet this like cruise ship in the middle of the ocean to get his grandparents off of it so that he can protect them. And it's right then when he gets the call that there's this bomb on this bus.
Okay.
So he has to choose to leave his grandparents behind, jump back on the jet, and try to make it to the school bus in time. So anyway, you get that sort of a family life with each of them, and you get those moments. Dick, of course, like it's funny they don't try to do anything to his family because the games master has obviously figured out that his family is Batman, and he's like, I'm not going to fuck with them. Yeah, so there is actually like a panel of Dick going like, yeah, we'll crush him. But you've already spent time with Dick alone because he's in their version of the Teen Titans, he is very much like the leader. Like that, okay. It's a real interesting 80s position of like he is the team leader. It's not a democracy. Like it's like it's like a police force or a military unit or something. Like they look to their captain. So you've already.
He's just doing what Batman taught him. That's
exactly.
If you look at any of the Bat family books, it's like Bruce Wayne's, word is final in usually almost every situation.
Yeah, exactly. So you've spent time alone with him because like Faraday approaches him first and you see him. I was actually about to say shirtless, but I flipped to the page and he's not shirtless. So apparently I'm just imagining Dick Grayson shirtless in places where he's not.
Todd, what on earth is this? Are we revealing something new here? That just he is very. Yeah. I mean, like they draw him very, very sort of what's the male gait is on him.
A beefcake. Yeah, he's beefcakey.
It's also worth noting for the record, by the way, Starfire in this basically has like a thong and a very, very tiny little like skimpy top, and that's basically it. Like when we talk about
you mentioned Reba McEntire hair, but for obvious reasons, and I'm sorry to say such a pig-headed comment, but she always reminded me of like Dolly Parton.
Oh, sure.
It was like this, they have taken the Dolly Parton, like boobiest, like big hairest, like moment of Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, and just put her into like this orange skin and a weird thong bikini thing. They kind of, I actually think this is a little bit cleaned up on the Starfire cheesecake than it used to be, but I'm not sure. It may just be that when I was a preteen that I was like, holy shit, she's not wearing anything.
It's one of the things that actually kept me away from comics as a young lad, because I'm just like, oh god, like how I don't know, for whatever reason that was off-putting to me back in the day, and because I'm just like, what? There's that aesthetic. It's weird hearing you describe it now, looking at it, in the context of this and time and everything. Like it makes perfect sense, but just that aesthetic Even like the Robin popped collar thing, like, and Dead Man used to be drawn like that a lot too. Like that never really jived with me until recently.
So you're saying the aesthetic, not the sort of over sexualization of the characters?
I mean, they kind of go hand in hand, right? Like,
right.
It's kind of hard to separate, but even like for example, Cyborg's wearing like what I call the thong, like the jockstrap Cyborg.
Dude, is that not what he wears? Because there's a shot in this, but probably several from behind, where he's like, he's standing in a crowd and the camera like angle, like I would say, is sort of behind him, and that was when I was very aware of like, why is like his butt cheeks covered, but then there's like an inch of leg skin, an inch of Cyborg, an inch of leg skin, an inch of Cyborg, and then like a boot. Like at that point, why didn't you just make both of his legs cybernetic? Why does the butt have to end?
It reminds you a lot of what Lilu wears when she's first revived in The Fifth Element. That sort of white,
you nailed it.
That white kind of Larry, like weird, like why, like what was the choice here? Like they could have just given her like a unitard thing, but instead they're like, we're gonna put it here, and there's gonna be this strip over here. It's funny, I never knew Cyborg ever had that costume until last year when people were posting about, like the Cyborg costume in the Justice League movie was shitty, and somebody's like, oh no, this is the original shitty Cyborg costume, and that kind of made the rounds, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess this was in the 80s, anything went. We weren't. It's interesting that we just weren't, as a comics buying group, sort of either demanding enough, or we just didn't realize that it could be a lot more grounded and real.
Well, I think it's an interesting point you bring up about I brought up that were you concerned by the over sexualization of it? Because I think as a kid there was a definite like mixed feeling about it. When because seriously, I read this when I was like 12, 13 years old. There was something very titillating about Starfire being dressed in as little as she was and being like extremely voluptuous, not to mention like she and Dick were like crazy horny in the 80s books. And so it felt very much like I was reading like this is kind of an adult story. This kind of makes me uncomfortable, but on the other hand, now as an adult, I'm like, what the hell were two men in their 30s or 40s doing writing a book about teenagers?
Yeah.
So, like, it is the Teen Titans, it's not like the young people's Titans or whatever, the young adult Titans. So it was it walked a line, Fun fact, my little band, the Carter Administration, I once wrote a song about Starfire and how inappropriate her costume was.
Go to SoundCloud.com. Wherever Ulysses S. Claus SoundCloud link is.
Go to todda.bandcamp.com.
There you go.
What was it even called? It was called Hot Sex Bikini Contest. Boom. That's what I called my song about Starfire. Now you know the secret to that song. But yeah, it was a conflict. So anyway, I bring that up because there's at least one line in his introduction and then like one line in the book where there's definitely like an objectification of a female character. And it hit me reading it, as a man in my 40s, like, oh, that's sexist. And when I was, and I was confronted with this sort of different reality of like, would I have done that the same way? Do I excuse it because that was sort of you think of the era that these guys were brought up in, of like 60s and 70s comics, were probably not as racy looking, but had just the same effect. Like when these guys saw Wonder Woman when they were 14, she was wearing very little clothing, even though she wasn't drawn as realistically and, voluptuous as Starfire, it had the same effect. Yeah. So are they just sort of following in that cheesecake tradition? Do we, where do we put the accountability for this? Anyway, it was interesting because I guess it hit me as someone reading this in 2018 going, okay, so how does the 1980, on one hand, that's perfectly 1988. Way to go. Like you made a comment about Starfire's looks and, one of the characters did. But anyway, it was just either they nailed the time period, or they still kind of think that way, and it's weird. But it was not. I wouldn't, I don't think it was lewd or leering or anything. It was just kind of an offhanded remark about her looks.
Says a lot, though. That every time this kind of stuff comes up, or we reference something from the '80s, it's ever more clear to me how damn revolutionary The Dark Knight Returns was, because it kind of put aside all that. It was like, we're going to show you this as realistically as possible. Like we look at it now and go, oh yeah, that seems natural and normal, but at the time that must have been just a jarring, coming from something like this to an old Clint Eastwood Batman with a Joker who's just like, wearing basically like a white suit jacket. And that's essentially like, there's not a lot of, they didn't put Carrie Kelly in like a sexy Robin costume. They're like, here's the Robin costume that we sold at the costume store, and she's wearing that. They
did make Catwoman like a really used up prostitute, right?
Yeah, but she wasn't like, she was kind of the madame of that. Well, like, they didn't
sort of victimized by or exploit. It was not a leering look at her.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It was. Yeah. So I bring that up because of that interesting like generational thing and looking back at the 80s. But then there's another moment where in front of this, at the end in the summary, like at the the denouement, they Nightwing is in front of that shadowy New World Order, tribunal kind of thing, with the men in the shadows telling him what's going on, or how they're going to treat him and Faraday and et cetera. And these men say, we're not going to be told about right and wrong by some teenager. And that hit me like a ton of bricks this week, because I think this is exactly what the fucking NRA and all of these like right-wing assholes are saying about these children from Parkland who have been speaking out, who were like, present at a massacre and have been speaking out. And this is the same line that they've been saying, these teenagers need to go back and, learn their politics or whatever. Yeah. It's like, how dare you be so dismissive? And it was, so yeah, anyway, I don't bring up the objectification to sort of smear these people. I bring it up in that like all of this conflict about age and what's appropriate, whether it's violence or sexuality or morality or whatever. It was just, these are the things I thought, as a dude in his 40s reading this comic book that he used to read when he was 12 years old. Gotcha. And so overall, like I really enjoyed it. It's like it's a great nostalgia trip for me. And if you are, a fan of the 80s comics or something, I think this is a great thing to pick up. But it's not something that I would just say, anyone go pick it up. I think I've given you the correct impression about the plot and how it works on different tropes, so it's not like you're going to see some plot that you've never seen before, or so that's, it kind of limited its own audience, even though it's not a reunion tour. It feels very specific to those readers, but I think there are just, hundreds of thousands, if not, millions of readers of this. And that's why DC is republishing all of the Wolfman Perez Teen Titans these days. So
got it. Anyway. Two quick questions for you.
Yeah.
You had mentioned early on that the dialogue was not part of the original writing drawing process and it was added later.
I'm glad you came back to that.
Yeah. Does it feel at any time that like it was forced in there or like tacked on or unnatural? Because I've never heard of that actually happening before, where the baseline story and the art was done before the thing was even written. Like that seems very backwards to me. Does it feel, or do you notice that at all?
I know there were a couple of moments where I wondered about that, like where I would just sort of second guess, because it's very weird. Like Wolfman writes the introduction. So I'd read his story of like that. That's where he talks about that in the introduction. And then Perez writes an epilogue at the end, or an afterword. And so I went into the book knowing that, I went in knowing like, oh, he didn't write this dialogue till after it was all plotted out. So there are a couple moments where I just wondered about it, but I don't think it suffers because of that. Like, I think his instinct was right on, which was, we know exactly what's going to happen in the panels, but I'm going to wait to write the actual dialogue until I can make it like as succinct and snappy as possible. And especially because they ended up transposing this, to 25 years later or whatever, it's better because there is no like anachronistic language that he is either having to go back and correct or whatever. So okay. I think that worked out a lot better for them if that was indeed their process, and nothing was actually, typed out in the dialogue. Because it sounds like the plot was, he also tells the story of how they figured out like the last sort of third of it. They knew where they were going, but they'd sort of left out some big chunks. And so they did have to replot some stuff to figure it out. So yeah, it's not like the whole book was wrapped up and then he just came back in and wrote dialogue. They very much had to work and tweak it. So that's why I'm not really clear, like what 75 pages, what from those originally 75 pages like exists in this book. But,
got it. Another question we often ask on this show is physical or digital?
Well, obviously I got the physical. And mine's a hardback and signed by Wolfman. So it was very much like an artifact to put on the shelf. It's a little bit oversized, but it's not super like thick. It's sort of the normal length of a graphic novel, but it's a slightly oversized a paper. It's not like a trade paperback that's just 8.5 by 11, and it's I'm sure the story would translate fine in digital. In fact, the colors, as true as they are to the 80s colors, but advanced with digital coloring techniques, would probably look great in digital. But I sort of think the audience for this is probably guys like me, or women my age who read this. Although because of the cheesecake factor, I'm willing to bet that most of the 1980s Teen Titans fans were boys.
Yeah, no,
or I don't know. Maybe.
I think we're safe to assume that that's probably true.
That sounds terrible. Anyway, I would think that this is like appealing to fans of the 80s comic, and they want the hardbound because they want the artifact.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the colors. It's sometimes every once in a while when we talk about digital versus physical, the color transfer in the physical format tends to have a certain quality to it that digital either doesn't capture, or because it's everything is a little bit heightened when there's a light screen. It doesn't quite come off the same way. So especially when we're talking about period pieces, so to speak, as this is, or like Watchmen's a great example too. I would never want to read Watchmen on an iPad. Like there's something about the way that color prints on that page that is essential to that story. And I think that's, when I look at, at some point we're going to discuss Dark Knight Returns in future episodes, and I've got a whole, probably very divisive spiel about that too. But even things like Killing Joke. Killing Joke's another good one too. Like they went back and they updated the coloring on the Killing Joke, and I happen to be one person who likes the newer version way better. But if you were to look at the old version, again, that on an iPad there's something jarring to it. Because keep in mind too, in the 80s, especially in the 80s, the use of color and the use of print and saturation all went together very specifically for a very particular reason. So like, they would use certain colors because they knew that the final ink output would be of a certain density. So it just all fit together. So you got to be careful when you're going back, and if you're collecting, or if you're, again, if you're sort of trying to find the best format for the story or for the medium or the art at the time, like really keep those things in mind.
Yeah, it's well, I'm glad you made such a point about the color, because that's something I've read a few 90s comics on Comixology, and the color is always something that sort of throws me off. Like it tends to look a little oversaturated on digital. Yeah, and exactly. I don't know if they've gone through some additional coloring. Like you said, I don't know if they've heightened those colors like on purpose in the transfer. Like, we need to sort of like make this a little bit louder to stand out on digital or something. But in so many of the books we read where the color palettes are muted, it sort of makes me wonder about, like if I were to read Saga digitally, am I going to be thrown off by that color palette or something? But
it's worth considering.
A lot of times digital is a great way to read comics from the 80s and 90s. Several times I have almost made it through the original Civil War series or Nightfall series, both of which are A different experience on digital. I've never actually completed either of those books. They're both so freaking huge. Like, not the Civil War, the original Civil War itself is very contained to like 12 issues, but they had all of these thrown in single issues that came out. And so I have a collection of all of those that I've never quite made it through. Anyway, what did you pick this week? I can't believe I rambled for that long about that.
Well,
I hope I sounded intelligent, and I apologize already. We don't have a listenership that gets angry at us, but I apologize if I sounded heteronormative in my description of why people would like Teen Titans.
Let's be honest, though. Like, in the 80s, comics publishers were writing comics for young boys. So stuff's gonna slip in that's meant for young boys, to sell books.
Well, that is another clear line of like one of the reasons people think that, like, one of the reasons that sexists think that girls don't read and women don't read comic books is because they specifically designed them not to be read by girls and women in every preceding decade. Yeah. It's sort of only like that's, and they did read them. And thank God they did, because like some of our favorite creators are women. Most of our favorite creators are women, I think.
Yeah. Well, on that note, my pick is by a woman too. It is, and I'll be quick with mine because this is so abstract. There's really I can't really delve into the details so much, but it is a book called A Land Called Tarot, story, art, and design by Gail Bertrand. And this is a little book that appeared, first of all, in the Island monthly magazine, which Image I don't think it's doing anymore, strangely enough. But like a couple of years ago, they had this really good run of the Island. A couple of my previous picks started there as well. Ancestor famously was an Island story. So The Land Called Tarot popped up there, and it was delightful because it is a book that has no dialogue whatsoever, no character names, not even onomatopoeias or anything like that. It is purely just frames and there is a story, and I'll get to that in a second, but there's nothing there. So it's very, very abstract, as most of my little indie picks are. So to see this pop up in the Island was kind of refreshing, because you went from maybe an Island story that was very, very dialogue heavy or very sort of avant-garde, and all of a sudden, you flip the page and the next thing you'd see would be an issue of this, where it's just like this crazy, beautifully drawn, abstract, surrealist kind of thing. So I've got the hardcover. It's published by Image. So after the Island, after it sort of concluded in the Island, they pitched Image, and Image put out the hardcover trade paperback. And it's just beautiful. It is heavily built on the actual tarot cards themselves, like the actual like tarot card art you see, the story, the symbology. There is a lot of symbology going on in this book. The baseline story is there's this young unnamed man who basically he kind of adventures around. He's got sort of a Don Quixote-esque armor on. And he's got this on again, off again alpaca that he rides around on, and sometimes he's by himself, and sometimes he's with the alpaca. But it's this beautiful, like surrealist, kind of future fantasy kind of world, and he just goes around investigating things, exploring things, and they all somehow tangentially tie back to actual art or actual symbols or motifs or characters from the tarot deck itself. And it's split into 3 or 4 chapters, but that's sort of meaningless because the stories, like the actual narrative, the linear narrative of him, where he goes, what he does, you could read this in any order and it wouldn't really matter. There's little things hinted at that you find in another chapter, but for the most part, it's pretty decentralized. What is interesting is that you'll see like maybe a chapter conclude, and then the next page is just a giant splash page of something completely unrelated, but really cool. And it may feature maybe like a castle or a character from another chapter later on, but it has nothing to do with the actual story. It's just sort of a moment in this kid's life. But he's our main protagonist. Everything follows him for the most part. You don't know if he's a prince. You don't know. I mean, there's sort of something to suggest he might be. He may just be this adventurer that, has been elevated in society. It's hard to tell. Like at some point he goes back and there's this crazy cool castle where there's like this kind of princess and this like wizard, like the sorceress woman and a giant like eagle king, and they're all sitting there and like there's this big this big kind of stone alleyway jettisoning out over the expanse, and they're basically having breakfast sitting on this thing, just chatting. And the guy, the prince, our main character rather, comes up and chats with those guys. So there's little things that come back and forth. The world that they build is very dreamlike. I swear I've dreamed some of these things before. It reminds me a lot of A Tale of Sand in that respect, just very surrealistic. And in fact, A Tale of Sand is probably the best kind of counterpoint to this, or the best sort of spiritual sibling, if you will. Because The Tale of Sand didn't have, had very little dialogue, but for the most part, it was just that one guy's journey. So very much hero's journey, kind of surrealist imagery, but just gorgeous, gorgeous art. I mean, I bought this just so I could look at the pictures in one collection, because she weaves a lot of like classic fantasy, some steampunk, some technical, some like technology driven sort of things. But it's
was this story and art by the same person?
Yeah, it's all by Gail Bertrand. Our story, art, and design all by her. So this is all.
I actually hate to correct you, but that's a dude.
It is a dude. Oh, seriously? Well, then never mind. Well, then, holy crap!
Both of our picks totally sexist this week.
I could have sworn this was a woman, because they even referred. I could have sworn reading something previously where they had mentioned her. So Gail Bertrand is well. There we go. I learned something new.
I looked it up and it hit his Deviant Art. So I'm going on the Deviant Art thing that says male United States. I don't really know.
Maybe there's another Gail Bertrand out there who's also a man.
I'm so sorry. I totally derailed it again.
Well, shoot. But I love this story because there's kind of a loneliness to a lot of the panels. Like our main character's on this journey largely by himself. He doesn't quite, you get the sense he doesn't really know exactly what he's looking for. He's wandering this land and interacting with these characters, doing some detective work. He'll find something that he has to take the stone to hear, and maybe there's a puzzle piece that he picked up before. He's like, oh, this is where this goes. And, he'll turn on something and he'll teleport somewhere else. And, maybe he fights a wolf and then, he survives and goes over here. So there's a lot of it. You very much feel like you're with him, kind of never ending story, style. You're with him on this journey. So I like a lot of that, but just honest to God, the panels themselves are so pretty. If you're a fan of this medium, if you're a fan of just collecting really inspired, interesting, original art, like this, pick this up. It's only, this particular one is retailed at $20, but I'm sure you can find some used copies, as well too. It's great. I really can't say much more about it than that, because it is. Again, there's no dialogue, there's no story, there's no like written narrative, there's no character names. It is something you really just have to pick up and just kind of get lost in. And it bears multiple rereadings. It's not something that you can feel like, oh, I'm done, I'll pick it up again. Like, you can pick it up every week and just marvel at it.
So cool. I'll jump in with questions then. In any way, do you ever learn the name of the protagonist or
no, there is absolutely no dialogue whatsoever. Not even like it doesn't even say like, John or something below his, below him as he tried, like nothing, no words at all. The only words, I think, are there even chapter names? Yeah, there are chapter names. There's like a kind of a splash before the chapter transitions that does say a single word, but that is it. And the words are very vague, and it's like, for example, like it says, like the beginning of the second chapter just says "le bateleur," Bateleur, and that's it. Nothing else. No character names. No nothing. So you get, you meet some of the same people again and again. So you get a sense of who they are. But it's again just very, which I like too, because you could give this to a French comics fan or a Chinese comics fan, and everybody will take. You don't have to translate it. It could be very universal in that respect.
Well, it very much. I was actually surprised when I hit that Deviant Art and saw United States, because the art that I'm seeing on Google Images is. So I get one sort of the feel of like the Miyazaki animation.
Yes.
Does that make sense to you? And then, but also, God, where was that panel I just saw? God, do you remember? Okay, am I crazy? Is it, did Ralph Bakshi do the Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit or something like that?
No, that was Rankin Bass, I think. I know what you're talking about. It's either Bakshi or Rankin Bass. It's one of those two.
Yeah, and that it's that there's something to the fantasy, this kind of like, well, actually, I don't even know what else happens. I'm just looking at one panel, but it looks kind of fantastic. Like there's sort of like a airship that sort of has a sail, like a like a boat and things like that. So yeah, it's sort of that fantasy look of that 70s, 80s sort of. I think Bakshi was American, but it's vaguely European or something.
Yeah,
it's anachronistic, or it's like a different culture. It's not American comic book looking. So
I would say it is a wonderful meld of the aesthetic and sensibility of Moebius, whom I'm a huge fan of him.
Yeah.
But it also has that Studio Ghibli look, or Ghibli look, that you'd mentioned before too, where it's it's beautifully rendered outdoor locations and that kind of, so that's how you get your Studio Ghibli style. And even some of the way they draw the faces and the articulations of the characters, how they move, how they move through very, very similar to Studio Ghibli, but it also has that imaginative quality of Moebius. But it is not, I stopped short of saying it's a perfect blend of those two, because it is very much its own thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But heavily, you can see a lot of influences, but just the fact that somebody took the tarot deck and decided to build a story around it, is itself very imaginative, just very original.
Are there? I mean, because of the way Island works, you were only getting it was serialized through that magazine. So are there clear chapter breaks or like issue breaks within this collection?
There are. Yeah, they just follow that exactly. Like I said, like you'll get, as the chapters transition, you'll get like a white page, that kind of tees up the next one, or you'll get like a splash page that's unconnected to the previous or following story, but it's just kind of there. But yeah, they collect it that way. It's not just one start to finish thing, which is why you can kind of poke around and you don't have to read it in any particular order. It's kind of circular in that regard too. It's not, it's not a linear story start to finish at all.
Okay. So just sort of, at the adventures of this one single protagonist through these different lenses of like vaguely the tarot cards.
Yeah, well, right? not even vaguely, like very, like for example, I'm looking at a page right now towards the end where he emerges from a lagoon in the middle of like a rocky canyon, and there's a gate, like kind of a stone doorway, but above the stone doorway, it has the number 13 in Roman numerals. So like that's the 13th tarot card. He walks in and he sees like kind of a Egyptian goddess kind of character holding two snakes and a lantern. So like that's right off of one of the cards. And like what he experiences there sort of takes on the meaning of that particular card. So it's as you go through it, like read it once just as a fan, but then read it a second time and Google, start have like the, Wikipedia of tarot cards pulled up too. So you can kind of infer some of the symbolism and like what you're meant to take away of what his journey is, or what's going on. Like another one, he takes a kind of a floating boat ride across a giant chasm, and the sort of the Grim Reaper boat, I can't think of the name. That character very much right off of another tarot card. Roman numerals kind of follow you around depending on what he's doing. So a lot of very deliberate use of tarot. I mean, the whole thing is very much an homage to it, but it's not like, it doesn't have that kind of weird occult feeling that I thought it might, because you hear like a land called tarot, you're like, oh, this is going to kind of be kind of a weird sort of thing that like Egon would have referenced in, Ghostbusters or something. It's not that at all. It's very, very, very accessible. Like you could even give this to a little kid and they wouldn't be freaked out by it, because it's drawn so friendly.
Huh. I believe the Greek boatman you were thinking of is Charon or Charon.
Yeah, it's meant to be. Yeah, that
the one who
kind of a character
ferries people across the river Styx.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I only know that. That's only top of mind because I've obsessively been listening to a Scorpion song from the 70s called Sails of Charon.
Well, there we go.
Sorry. Todd's had 2.5 cups of coffee and is ready to derail the conversation at any point. So you mentioned hardback.
Yep.
Why hard? Was there no paperback available? What made you choose the hardback?
It's only available in this format.
Okay.
I don't think since they've done a paperback, I don't know why they would. You want this in physical form and in hardback. Gotcha. This is very much like many of my picks. This is very much an art book almost first and foremost that happens to really utilize a lot of the graphic novel. The way a graphic novel works is obviously applied, but you want this sitting on your shelf. You want to be able to pull it out. You want the big splash pages, covering 2 pages in front of you. I don't think an iPad would deliver anywhere near the sort of. You also, the other thing too is you want to be able to see glimpses of other panels as you go through it, because part of the fun is like you're looking at one thing, but then the next page you see a couple frames of something that's like, what is that? And so it pulls you through. I would not want to look at each frame, one by one.
Awesome. I'm so glad you brought it. We've brought this up in other episodes, but that spread is one of the things that is a digital killer.
Yes.
When you've got a 2-page spread. No, so is this printed in sort of normal, 8x11 dimensions, or is it even bigger than that?
Nope. It sits on your shelf just like a trade paperback would. Perfect. Exact same size. It just happens to be hardcover, so it's just maybe slightly bezel slightly higher.
Oh, did you find it in a store, or did you order it?
I ordered it. I knew it was coming. I was anxiously awaiting it. In fact, I had been pestering the Island kind of compilers or editors for a while. I'm like, can we ever get the Land of Tarot as a standalone? Because at that point they had put out 3 trades from Island Stories, so I'm like, it's only a matter of time. And sure enough, they popped it out, and I was so happy because I still have my original Islands, and I love seeing these stories in the context of that magazine, but having them as standalone pieces is definitely extra benefit.
Really interesting. I mean, you called out the Island series way back when, like you were reading it, and there were a couple. So Ancestor, I knew you had talked about several times, and then I'm frantically clicking through the Image site. Like, it is really impressive to think of all the collected editions that you and I, together have now owned, because there's one series that I ended up getting. I don't think I even knew that it was an Island until after I'd gotten it. And then you told me, and crap, I cannot remember it. And you've now bought a couple. What a cool launching pad for Image. And I assume that is like a really, easier to do as digital, but sort of neater to get those magazines.
Oh, you want to grab the magazines. Every cover is completely different. And and some of the stories they'll come back. I mean, the last one they published was March of last year, 2017. So they haven't done it for a while. And I hope it comes back. If you're a collector, the first 4 or 5, I think, at least the first 4, but I think maybe the first 5 issues of Island, they're a little beefier. Like they kind of move to a more traditional kind of magazine kind of format after that. But the first 2, they're almost like trade paperbacks onto themselves. So if you're collecting, get those first 4. Like they really feel substantial. My particular favorite is the 3rd. Just Google Image Comics, Island number 3. That's the one that really, like, I saw that one. Okay, I need to start getting on this train. And it's a great low impact way for Image to introduce very indie or off the beaten path sorts of titles without having to give them a monthly order. So you can do something like Ancestor, which is edgy and weird and kind of off the cuff, and have it appear in Island. And then, like, if it works, then do a graphic novel after that, or a trade paperback after that. Like that really worked well for them. And so I do hope it comes back.
Yeah. Once again, I've rambled a long time on my pick, and you have concisely told me about a book that now I want to go pick up, which is why I like doing this show.
Heck yeah.
That Land Called Tarot sounds, and what I've seen, it just looks so cool. So that's probably one I'm going to add to my shelf as well. In the meantime, where can people find this podcast?
You can find us wherever you get your podcasts: Google Play, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, wherever you go. Hopefully soon Spotify, so keep that in mind. Also, look for Coffee and Comics or the Todd and Taylor Show. We're kind of in this weird transition time. So if you search Todd and Taylor Show, you'll find us, but hopefully we'll be popping up soon under just purely Coffee and Comics. And then also you can find us online. We are Find Us There on social media, and then there.network is the website.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Taylor. We will see everyone next time for another episode of Coffee and Comics.
Bye-bye.